My cousins laughed when I claimed the old ranch, until the lawyer revealed what lay beneath the pasture lines. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, or like you had to fight for the one thing that was truly yours, then stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. It's about how the things people throw away are sometimes the most valuable things of all. The air on my 18th birthday tasted like freedom and exhaust fumes. For 6 years, the state of Oregon had been my legal guardian, a parent made of paperwork and beige-walled offices. My home was a series of buildings with names like Oak Creek Youth Facility and Juniper Group Home, places that sounded like pleasant suburban neighborhoods, but felt like waiting rooms for a life that was always about to start somewhere else. On that Tuesday in October, the waiting was finally over. I stood on the curb with a worn duffel bag at my feet and a single manila envelope in my hand. The duffel bag contained 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and a toothbrush. The envelope contained my future, or what little of it the system had decided I was owed. Mrs. Gable, my case manager for the final 2 years, had handed it to me with a look of practiced sympathy. Her job was to see kids like me out the door, to sever the final thread of institutional responsibility. She was good at her job. "This is it, Leo," she'd said, her voice neutral, as if commenting on the weather. "The state's obligation is fulfilled. Everything you need to start is in there." I didn't open it in front of her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing my reaction, whether it was disappointment or confusion or, least likely of all, hope. I just nodded, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out of the double doors without looking back. The automatic hiss and click of the closing doors was the punctuation mark on my childhood. I walked 3 blocks to a bus stop, the unfamiliar weight of unsupervised freedom settling on me. It felt less like a release and more like being unplugged. In the home, every minute was accounted for. Wake up, breakfast, chores, school, group therapy, dinner, lights out. A rhythm so ingrained in me that standing on a city street with no schedule felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I sat on the cold plastic bench and finally looked at the envelope. It was thin, too thin to hold much of a future. My name, Leo Sterling, was typed neatly on the front. Inside was a cashier's check for $500, my emancipation stipend, they called it. A state-issued ID card, my birth certificate, and a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, Alsea, Oregon. Tucked behind the ticket was a business card and a letter. The card was for a law office, Abernathy and Sloan, attorneys at law. The letter was printed on the same heavy cream-colored letterhead. It was addressed to me. "Dear Mr. Sterling," it began, the formality of it feeling strange, like a costume I was being asked to wear. "My name is Arthur Abernathy. I was the legal counsel for your late grandfather, Thomas Sterling. Upon the occasion of your 18th birthday, as per the stipulations of his final will and testament, I am to inform you that you are the sole heir to his estate." My breath caught in my chest. Estate. The word sounded grand, important. It conjured images of sprawling mansions and rolling green hills from old movies. I had only the faintest memories of my grandfather, fragmented images of a gruff man with hands like worn leather and a smell of pipe tobacco and damp earth. He died when I was 10, 2 years before my mom passed, and my world unraveled into the foster system. I never knew what happened to his property. My mom never talked about it. Her siblings, my aunt and uncle, had cut off contact after she got sick. They lived near my grandfather. I remembered that much. The estate, the letter continued, consists of a single property, the 160-acre Sterling Ranch, located at the address enclosed, along with all structures and chattels thereupon. 160 acres. The number seemed impossibly large. I tried to picture it, but my mind, trained on the dimensions of dorm rooms and cafeterias, couldn't grasp the scale. Then came the catch. I knew there had to be one. Please be advised that the property carries a significant burden of delinquent property taxes totaling approximately $28,000. Furthermore, the property has been unoccupied for 8 years and is reported to be in a state of considerable disrepair. Several offers have been made by your cousins, Mark and Sarah Vance, to purchase the property from the estate for a sum sufficient to clear the tax lien, which I have thus far declined on your behalf. My cousins. I remembered them from a single-family picnic long ago. Mark, a few years older, with a cruel smirk, and Sarah, who had watched him with quiet approval. They were my Aunt Carol's kids. The letter concluded with instructions to contact Mr. Abernathy upon my arrival in Alcea. His office number was listed below his neat, slightly slanted signature. I stared at the letter, the bus ticket, the $500 check. It wasn't a future. It was a riddle. A broken-down ranch, a mountain of debt, and a pair of cousins who were already circling like vultures. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, its doors folding open. I had $500 to my name. I could tear up the letter, cash the check, and disappear into the city, try to find a job, a room, a life. Or I could get on that bus. I could go claim the only thing in the world that had my name on it. I folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and stepped onto the bus. I was going to Alcea. I was going home, even if home was just a ruin. The journey was a slow transition from one world to another. The bus windows framed the gray vertical lines of the city as they gradually gave way to the sprawling, anonymous suburbs, and then, finally, to the deep, wet green of rural Oregon. For hours, I watched the landscape blur past. Douglas firs stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with rain. The sky was a uniform, oppressive white. It was a landscape that didn't ask for attention. It simply was, vast and indifferent. It was a good place to think. I replayed my life in my head, not the big moments, but the small ones. The feeling of a specific scratchy blanket in my first foster home. The taste of the powdered milk we had at the group home. The way the light would hit the dust motes dancing in the air in the quiet hour before dinner. My life had been a collection of borrowed spaces, temporary things. The idea of owning something, even a derelict piece of land, felt both terrifying and thrilling. It was a responsibility I had never been given. I thought about my grandfather, Thomas. My memories were like old, faded photographs. I remembered him teaching me how to skip a stone across a creek, his large hand guiding my small one. I remembered the scent of his workshop, sawdust and oil and something metallic. He was a man of few words, his silence as vast as the land he lived on. My mother always spoke of him with a complicated mix of love and frustration. "Dad's stubborn," she'd say. "He's rooted to that place. You can't move a mountain." After he died, the silence from that side of the family was absolute. No calls, no cards, nothing. It was as if that entire branch of our family tree had been sawed off. Now, 8 years later, they were back, offering to buy the mountain. I pulled out the letter again, smoothing the creases. The offer from my cousins felt less like a kindness and more like an insult. They wanted to buy my inheritance for the price of its debt. They knew I was a kid aging out of the system. They knew I had nothing. It was a predatory kindness, the kind that expects you to be grateful for being taken advantage of. The bus groaned up a steep pass, the engine whining in protest. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, streaking down the dirty glass. I felt a knot of anger tighten in my stomach. It was a familiar feeling, a low, simmering heat that had kept me company through years of being misunderstood, mislabeled, and moved around. It was the anger of powerlessness. But this time, it felt different. For the first time, I wasn't just angry at a faceless system. I was angry at them, at Mark and Sarah, at my aunt. They had a home, a family. They had everything I didn't. And now they wanted the last piece of my history, the last connection I had to my grandfather. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a kind, tired face, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Elsie's the next stop, son," he said. "Not much out there but trees and quiet." "It's what I'm looking for," I replied, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. He just nodded, a small, knowing smile on his lips. As the bus began its descent into the valley, the rain let up. A sliver of watery sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the drenched landscape. The world outside looked clean, washed, new. I took it as a sign. The bus pulled into a tiny town that was little more than a wide spot in the road. A gas station, a small grocery store, a tavern with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses. A sign read, "Welcome to Alsea, population 412. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a sigh of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves of the bus shelter. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. It was cold, clean, and real. I took a deep breath. My duffel bag felt heavier now, and so did the envelope in my jacket pocket. I found a payphone outside the grocery store, a relic I was surprised still existed, and used a precious quarter to call Mr. Abernathy's office. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Abernathy and Sloan." "I'm calling for Arthur Abernathy," I said. "This is Leo Sterling." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Sterling, we've been expecting you. Arthur is with a client, but he asked me to give you instructions. Do you have a pen?" I didn't. "Just tell me," I said, trying to memorize it. She gave me the address of the ranch, a few miles out of town, and the name of a taxi service, the only one, in the next town over. She said Mr. Abernathy would meet me at the property tomorrow morning at 9. "And Mr. Sterling," she added, her voice softening slightly, "he said to tell you there's a key under the river stone by the back porch steps, the one shaped like a heart." A heart-shaped stone. It was the first thing about this whole situation that didn't feel cold and transactional. It felt like a message from my grandfather, a small, personal detail in a story of legalities and debt. A half-hour later, a dusty sedan that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and air freshener rattled to a stop in front of me. The driver, a woman with a weathered face and sharp, intelligent eyes, looked me up and down. "You the one headed out to the old Sterling place?" I nodded. She grunted, popping the trunk. "Been a while since anyone's gone out there. Place has been sitting empty since Tom passed. You his grandson?" "I am." "Well, I'll be," she said, shaking her head as we pulled onto the main road. "Heard his grandkids from the city were trying to snap it up. Guess they didn't count on you." The town disappeared behind us almost immediately, replaced by a narrow two-lane road
winding along a rushing river. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead. It was beautiful and intimidating. "Name's Marge," the driver said, not taking her eyes off the road. "Drove your granddad more times than I can count. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself, especially near the end." "What was he like?" I asked, hungry for any detail.
Marge was silent for a long moment. "He was a man who knew his own mind," she said finally, "and he loved this land more than most people love other people. You remember that." She turned off the main road onto a graveled drive marked by a faded, leaning wooden sign that I could just make out in the fading light. Sterling. The car bumped and jostled for another quarter-mile before the trees opened up into a clearing. And there it was. The house was a simple two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling away to reveal weathered gray wood beneath. The porch roof sagged in the middle, like a tired old man slouching his shoulders. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at a pasture so overgrown with thistle and blackberry bushes that it looked like a wild, tangled sea. A large, dilapidated barn stood off to one side, its roof caved in on one end. It wasn't a grand estate. It was a ruin. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of arrival. "Here you are," Marge said, handing me my duffel bag. "Mr. Abernathy's a good man. You listen to him, and don't you let those cousins of yours push you around." I paid her from my small wad of cash, leaving a generous tip. She looked at the money, then back at me. "You take care, kid." She turned the car around and drove away, her taillights shrinking into the twilight until I was left alone in the immense, quiet dark. The only sound was the wind whispering through the tall grass. It was the sound of loneliness, but also the sound of peace. I walked to the back of the house, my feet sinking into the damp soil. By the porch steps, half buried in the mud, was a collection of smooth river stones. I knelt, my fingers tracing their cold, wet surfaces until I found it. A dark gray stone, worn smooth by 1,000 years of water, shaped like a perfect, simple heart. Underneath it, covered in a thin layer of grime, was a heavy, old-fashioned brass key. I stood up, the key cold and solid in my palm. It felt less like a key to a house and more like the first piece of the puzzle. I put it in the lock. The tumblers groaned in protest, but with a firm turn, they gave way. The door swung inward with a long, low creak, opening into a darkness that smelled of dust, mice, and time. I stepped across the threshold, from the life that had been assigned to me, into the one my grandfather had left behind. The inside of the house was a time capsule. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, turning the familiar shapes of furniture into pale, ghostly mounds. In the faint light from the open door, I could see the outlines of a living room, a sofa, an armchair, a stone fireplace with a stack of wood still resting on the hearth. It was as if someone had just walked out one day and never come back. I flicked a light switch by the door, but nothing happened. The power had been off for years. Using the flashlight on my phone, I did a slow sweep of the room. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating faded floral wallpaper, a gallery of empty picture hooks on the wall, and a thick carpet of dust bunnies on the hardwood floor. It was profoundly, deeply silent. This wasn't the institutional quiet I was used to, the quiet of polished floors and humming fluorescent lights. This was an organic quiet, the quiet of a place reclaimed by nature and neglect. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and continued my exploration, my footsteps muffled by the dust. The kitchen was small and dated, with avocado green countertops and wooden cabinets. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August, 8 years ago. A coffee cup sat by the sink, a dark ring of residue at the bottom. It was an intimate, heartbreaking detail. I felt like an intruder, a ghost walking through someone else's last ordinary moments. I moved through the downstairs, room by room, a dining room with a heavy oak table, a small study lined with empty bookshelves, the books long since packed away or sold. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly my grandfather's. A simple iron bed frame stood in the middle of the room, stripped of its mattress. A wooden dresser stood against the wall, its drawers all slightly ajar, as if searched in a hurry. The other bedroom was smaller, and it sent a jolt through me. A faded patch of wallpaper showed a pattern of smiling cowboys and bucking broncos. A single, small wooden horse, its paint chipped, sat on the windowsill. This was my room. The room I must have stayed in on those rare visits as a small child. I ran my hand along the dusty windowsill, a phantom limb of memory reaching across the years. I could almost feel the sun on my face, almost hear the distant sound of my grandfather working in the barn. But the memory was a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The colors bled together, the details lost. I spent the rest of the evening in a strange state of numb activity. I found a broom and swept the worst of the dust and debris out of the kitchen. In a pantry, I discovered a small cache of canned goods, beans, soup, peaches, and a box of matches. There was a hand pump well out back, and after several minutes of rusty, groaning effort, I managed to coax a stream of clear, ice-cold water. I heated a can of soup on the old propane stove, which miraculously still had fuel in the tank. I ate standing up in the dark kitchen, the silence of the house pressing in on me. After I ate, I unrolled my sleeping bag on the dusty floor of the living room, near the cold fireplace. I was too tired to be scared, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind racing. What was I doing here? I was an 18-year-old with $500, a can of beans, and a derelict ranch with a crippling debt. The smart thing to do would be to meet the lawyer, sign whatever papers he put in front of me, let my cousins have the place, and take whatever cash was left over to start a life somewhere else. That was the logical move, the sensible move. But as I lay there in the heart of my grandfather's house, I felt a stubborn, illogical seed of defiance taking root in my chest. This place, this ruin, was mine. It was the only thing in my entire life that was truly, legally mine. Giving it up felt like giving up on the last piece of myself, the last connection to a family I barely knew. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window frames and moaning under the eaves. It sounded like the house was breathing, sighing a long, weary breath. Or maybe it was whispering a warning. I finally drifted off to a restless sleep, dreaming of empty rooms and faded wallpaper. The next morning, I was woken by a sharp rapping on the front door. Sunlight, thin and pale, was streaming through the grimy windows. It was 9 o'clock sharp. I scrambled up, wiping the sleep from my eyes, and pulled the heavy door open. The man standing on the porch was exactly what a small-town lawyer should look like. He was in his late 60s, with a fringe of white hair, a kind but weary face, and a tweed jacket that had seen better days. He held a worn leather briefcase in one hand. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Arthur Abernathy," he said, extending his other hand. His handshake was firm and dry. "I apologize for the state of things. I imagine this is all a bit of a shock." "You could say that," I said, stepping back to let him in. He walked into the living room, his eyes taking in the dusty furniture, the sleeping bag on the floor. He didn't show any judgment, just a quiet, professional assessment. "Your grandfather was a very particular man, Leo," he said, switching to my first name. "He left very specific instructions. He was adamant that the property not be sold until you had the chance to see it for yourself, to stand on the land." He opened his briefcase on the dusty dining room table and pulled out a thick file. "Let's get the unpleasantries out of the way. This is the file on the estate. As I mentioned in my letter, the tax delinquency is significant. The county will auction the property in 90 days if the balance isn't paid." He slid a document across the table. It was an official notice from the county assessor's office. The amount owed was $28,432.17. Seeing the number in print made it feel even more insurmountable. My $500 stipend felt like a joke. "Your cousins, through their attorney, have made a formal offer," he continued, pulling out another letter. "They are offering to pay the tax lien in full and give you an additional $10,000 in exchange for the deed. $40,000 for 160 acres. Even I knew that was ridiculously low, but $10,000 was more money than I had ever had in my life. I could walk away from this mess with enough cash to get an apartment, find a job, and start over. It was the sensible choice, the easy way out." "What do you think of their offer?" I asked, watching his face. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. "Legally, it's a valid offer. Personally," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I think your grandfather would have used it to light his pipe." A small smile touched my lips. He didn't like them much, did he? "Thomas didn't have much use for people who only saw this land in terms of dollars per acre," he said. "He saw something else here. He spent the last years of his life trying to protect it." "Protect it from what?" I asked. "From them. From everyone." Mr. Abernathy looked out the window at the overgrown pasture. "He stopped farming. He let the place go to rack and ruin on purpose. He made it look worthless because he believed what was here was too valuable to fall into the wrong hands." I must have looked confused because he sighed and sat down at the table, gesturing for me to do the same. "Leo, your grandfather wasn't just a farmer. By trade, he was a geologist. He worked for big oil and mining companies for 30 years before he retired and came back here. He knew land, not just the surface of it, but what lies beneath." He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "Before he passed, he gave me a locked box and a letter. The letter instructed me to give the box to you, and only you, on your 18th birthday. He said it would explain everything. He made me promise. Thomas was a man whose promises you kept." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy metal footlocker about the size of a shoebox. It was old and gray, with a sturdy lock on the front. He placed it on the table between us. The sound of the metal on the wood echoed in the quiet room. "I don't have the key," he said. "He told me you would have to find it. He said, 'The boy will know where to look when the time is right.'" My mind flashed back to the heart-shaped stone, the key I had found beneath it. It was a test, a message only I was meant to understand. But I didn't say anything. I just stared at the box. It felt like the entire weight of my past and future was contained within that small metal container. "So, what are my options?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You have 3, he said, ticking them off on his fingers. 1. You accept your cousin's offer. You walk away with $10,000, free and clear. It's the simplest path. 2. You do nothing. In 90 days, the county seizes the property and sells it at auction. After the taxes are paid, you would receive any remaining funds, which, frankly, wouldn't be much more than what your cousins are offering. The auction buyers will be developers looking for a bargain. He paused, taking a deep breath. Or 3, you find a way to pay the back taxes. You keep the ranch. You honor whatever it was your grandfather was trying to protect. How am I supposed to get $28,000? I asked, the question sounding absurd as soon as I said it. I don't know, Mr. Abernathy admitted. But Thomas Sterling was the most resourceful man I ever met. My gut tells me the answer is in that box. Just then, a car horn blared from the driveway. A shiny new pickup truck, a monstrosity of chrome and black paint, had pulled up behind Mr. Abernathy's modest sedan. A man and a woman got out. Even from a distance, I recognized them. Mark and Sarah. Mark was thicker now, his face fleshy, but he had the same arrogant posture. Sarah was thin and severe, her arms crossed as she surveyed the dilapidated house with open disgust. "Looks like your fan club has arrived," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice laced with a dry, subtle humor. "Shall we?" We walked out onto the sagging porch. Mark's eyes swept over me, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. He looked at my worn jeans, my thin jacket. He saw a charity case. "Leo," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "It's been a long time. We were so sorry to hear about, well, everything. We came to see if you'd received our offer. We just want to help you out. Take this burden off your shoulders." "The burden of my own property?" I asked, my voice colder than I expected. Sarah stepped forward. "Let's not play games. This place is a wreck. It's a money pit. We're doing you a favor. We'll give you $15,000, right now, cash. You can be on a bus back to the city this afternoon." She was trying to bully me, to dangle a slightly bigger carrot in front of the poor orphan. The anger I'd felt on the bus returned, hot and sharp. I looked from their expensive truck to their clean, new clothes, and then back at my grandfather's house, peeling paint and all. "I'll think about it," I said. Mark laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Think about what? You have nothing. We're your only option. Don't be stupid." "I'll think about it," I repeated, my gaze steady. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flash of raw annoyance. He wasn't used to being told no. "Fine," he snapped. "You have 24 hours. Then the offer goes back to 10. Don't come crying to us when the bank takes it." They got back in their truck, slammed the doors, and sped away, spitting gravel from their tires. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, the dust settling around me. Mr. Abernathy put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, son. They've shown their hand. Now, let's see what your grandfather left you." We went back inside. The metal box sat on the table waiting. I suddenly knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that I wasn't going to sell. I was going to fight. I just had to find out what I was fighting for. After Mr. Abernathy left, promising to call later in the day, the house felt even quieter, the silence charged with anticipation. The metal footlocker sat on the table like a silent oracle. The key from under the heart-shaped stone was still in my pocket. I took it out, its brass surface now warm from my body heat. It felt ancient, important. I hesitated for a long moment. Everything I was, and everything I could be, felt hinged on what was inside that box. My life had been a series of closed doors, of being told what to do and where to go. This was the first door I had the key for. This was my choice. Taking a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a satisfying clunk, the lock turned. I lifted the heavy lid. The air that escaped from the box smelled of old paper and leather, and something else, something faintly chemical. The contents were packed tightly, a dense archive of a hidden life. On the very top was a stack of about 20 photographs, held together by a brittle rubber band. I lifted them out carefully. The first photo was of a young woman with a kind, sad smile, holding a baby. My mother and me. The next few were of my grandfather, a man much younger than I remembered him, standing proudly in front of the farmhouse when the paint was still fresh and the porch was still straight. He had his arm around a woman I didn't recognize, presumably my grandmother. They looked happy, their faces full of a hope that seemed a world away from the ruin I was sitting in. I kept going through the pictures, snapshots of a life I was never part of. Christmases, birthdays, harvests. My aunt and uncle were in some of them, and a much younger Mark and Sarah. In every photo, they stood slightly apart, their smiles a little too tight. Even then, they seemed like outsiders in their own family. The last photo was just of my grandfather, taken not long before he died. He looked tired, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were clear and fiercely intelligent. He was standing in the middle of the overgrown pasture, one hand resting on a strange, tripod-like piece of equipment, staring not at the camera, but at the ground beneath his feet. Beneath the photos was a thick, leather-bound journal. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's handwriting, a dense, spiky script that was hard to read. It wasn't a diary of his feelings, but a meticulous log. It was filled with dates, geological notations, chemical formulas, and precise, hand-drawn diagrams of rock strata. It was the work of a scientist. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning for anything I could understand. Words like quartz, silica content, igneous intrusion, and alluvial deposit jumped out at me. Most of it was meaningless to me, but the sheer volume of work was staggering. Years and years of detailed observations about this specific piece of land. He wasn't just living here, he was studying it. He was obsessed with it. And then I found a different kind of entry, dated about a year before he died. The script was shakier, more urgent. Blackwood came again today, it read. The third time this month. Their offer is almost insulting in its generosity. They think I'm just a stupid old farmer. They flash their money and their slick geological surveys, but they don't know what I know. They see the surface, the low-grade quartz visible in the outcroppings. They don't see the core. They don't know about the purity. The next entry was a few days later. Carol and her husband brought the boys over. They talked about my health, about the burden of the ranch. They're in on it. Blackwood must have gotten to them, offered them a finder's fee. The poison of greed spreads fast. They look at me, but they see a roadblock. They look at my land, and they see a payout. Blackwood. The name sounded cold and corporate. I kept reading. The entries became a chronicle of his growing isolation. He wrote about changing the locks, about putting up no trespassing signs. He wrote about his deliberate campaign of neglect. Let the blackberries grow, one entry read. Let the paint peel. A fortress of poverty is the best defense against the wealthy. They can't imagine anything valuable being hidden inside something that looks worthless. He was protecting it. The word from Mr. Abernathy came back to me. He wasn't just letting the ranch go, he was camouflaging it. Tucked into the back of the journal was a thick, sealed envelope made of heavy vellum. My name, Leo, was written on the front in my grandfather's hand. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the letter Mr. Abernathy had mentioned. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal. The letter inside was several pages long, the same spiky script as the journal. "My dear Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry I could not be there to see it. I am sorry for so much. I know your life has not been easy. I know you have likely felt abandoned, alone. None of that was what I wanted for you." I had to stop and take a breath, my eyes stinging. "You must have many questions," the letter went on. "Why did I let the ranch fall apart? Why did I cut myself off from everyone? The answer is simple. To protect your future. To protect you. Years ago, a corporation called Blackwood Development discovered a quartz deposit on this land. They tried to buy it from me. They offered a lot of money, more money than our family had ever seen. But I am a geologist, Leo. I knew my own land better than their fancy surveyors. What they saw was just the tip of the iceberg. What lies beneath this pasture is not just quartz. It is one of the purest, most extensive deposits of high-grade silica sand in North America. Not the kind you find on a beach. This is the raw material for fiber optics, for semiconductors, for the entire digital world. It is incredibly rare and immensely valuable. I read the words again, trying to process them. Silica sand, semiconductors. It sounded like science fiction. Blackwood knew what was here, but they tried to swindle me. When I refused to sell, they became aggressive. They tried to have the land rezoned. They tried to use eminent domain. They even turned your aunt and her family against me, promising them a share. I realized then that I couldn't fight them head on. They had armies of lawyers and endless money. So I fought them my way. I made the property worthless. I ran up the taxes, knowing the debt would be a shield. No one looks for treasure in a junkyard. I created a fortress of neglect, and I waited. I waited for you to come of age. I felt a profound sense of awe. This wasn't the story of a sad old man giving up. It was the story of a brilliant, stubborn man playing a long game, a game of strategic decay. The ranch itself, the house, the barn, they are nothing, he wrote. They are the shell. The real inheritance is the land itself. But the ownership is complicated. I knew that if I left the mineral rights to you directly in my will, Blackwood and your cousins would have found a way to contest it, to have you declared incompetent, to steal it from you while you were still a minor in the state's care. So I set up something different. My eyes scanned the page, my pulse quickening. The mineral rights for this property are not part of the surface estate. I legally severed them years ago. They are held in an independent, irrevocable trust called the Alcea Silica Trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust is you, Leo Sterling. The trust was structured to become active on your 18th birthday. As of today, you, and you alone, control what happens to what is under this ground. Mr. Abernathy has the trust documents. He was my only confidant in this. He will help you. I leaned back in my chair, the letter shaking in my hand. I felt dizzy, disoriented. The dusty, quiet room seemed to tilt on its axis. All my life, I had believed I was adrift, a piece of debris from a shipwrecked family. But I wasn't. I had been anchored all along to this place, to this secret, to this incredible, patient act of love. But there was one more page. Leo, this is a heavy burden to place on your shoulders. This inheritance is not just a gift, it's a choice. You could sell the rights to the highest bidder and be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. Blackwood would pay a fortune. Or you can do what I hope you will do. Use this resource wisely. Don't let them strip mine this valley and poison the river I taught you to fish in. Find a way to create something that helps the community, that honors the land instead of just exploiting it. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I did all of this for you. I was never much for words, boy, but I hope this shows you. I loved you. Be a good man. Your grandfather, Thomas. I put the letter down on the table. Tears were streaming down my face, dripping onto the dusty wood. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from a feeling so immense I couldn't name it. It was grief and gratitude and a staggering sense of being seen, of being known by a man I barely remembered. I cried for the lonely old man who had spent his last years pretending to be a failure to protect me. I cried for the lost years, for the family I never had. And I cried for the boy who had walked out of a group home yesterday with nothing, who was now sitting on a treasure so vast he couldn't comprehend it. I looked out the window at the tangled, worthless-looking pasture, but I didn't see weeds and thorns anymore. I saw a sleeping giant. I saw my grandfather's love, made real and tangible, hidden in plain sight. And I knew what I had to do. The phone call to Mr. Abernathy was one of the strangest conversations of my life. I read him my grandfather's letter, my voice cracking with emotion. On the other end of the line, there was a long, profound silence. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. "Arthur, are you there?" "I'm here, son," he finally said, his voice thick with what sounded like awe. "I'm here. I knew Thomas was up to something, but I never imagined this. The man was a genius, a stubborn, brilliant old goat." He let out a long, slow whistle. "An irrevocable trust. He legally firewalled the mineral rights from the surface property and the tax debt. It's airtight. The cousins can have the surface, but it's worthless without what's underneath. Leo, do you understand what this means? You hold all the cards, all of them." "What do I do now?" I asked, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. It was one thing to read about it in a letter. It was another to have to act on it. "First thing," he said, his voice shifting back into its pragmatic, lawyerly tone, "is we get those trust documents officially activated and filed with the state. I have them in a safe deposit box. I'll handle that first thing in the morning. Second, we need to get an independent appraisal of the mineral deposits. We can't negotiate if we don't know the true value. I know a reputable geological consulting firm in Portland. They'll be discreet." "And the taxes?" I asked. "The $28,000? "Don't you worry about the taxes," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The trust contains a small seed fund for administrative and legal expenses. Your grandfather thought of everything. We'll pay the county tomorrow. This ranch is yours, free and clear." He paused. "Your cousins are going to find out. When we file the trust paperwork, it will become a matter of public record. It's going to get ugly, Leo. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Mark's sneering face, of Sarah's dismissive wave. I thought of the years of being pushed around, of having no control. "I'm prepared," I said. It felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. The next 24 hours were a blur. I barely slept. I reread my grandfather's letter and his journals, absorbing the story, the science, the sacrifice. I walked the land, my feet tracing the overgrown paths he must have walked 1,000 times. I stood in the middle of the pasture and tried to imagine the immense wealth sleeping beneath my worn-out boots. It didn't feel real. The land didn't look any different. The birds still sang in the trees. The wind still whispered through the tall grass. But I was different. I had a purpose. I had a legacy to protect. The call came the next afternoon. It was Mark. His voice, once so full of arrogant dismissal, was now tight with a barely controlled rage. "What did you do?" he spat into the phone. There was no greeting, no pretense. "I just got a call from our lawyer. He said you paid the back taxes. Where did a gutter kid like you get $30,000? "I had some help," I said calmly, enjoying his fury. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he sneered. "Playing games. Fine. You want to keep this dump? Be my guest. Our offer is off the table. You're on your own. Let's see how long you last out here with no money, no help. You'll come crawling back to us in a month." He was still in the dark. He knew I'd paid the taxes, but he didn't know how, or more importantly, why. He still thought the fight was about the surface, about the dilapidated house and the overgrown fields. "I don't think I will, Mark," I said. "Goodbye." I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal and logistical activity orchestrated by Mr. Abernathy. The geological consultants arrived, a team of quiet, serious professionals with sophisticated equipment. They spent days on the property, taking core samples, running tests. Their presence did not go unnoticed. Cars slowed down on the main road, their occupants staring at the strange drilling rigs in the pasture. The small town of Alsea was buzzing with rumors. I stayed in the house, cleaning, making small repairs. I bought a new mattress, some basic groceries, and a few tools with the money from the trust fund. Slowly, painstakingly, I was making the house a home. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and patched the leak in the kitchen roof. Each small act of labor felt like an act of reclamation, both of the house and of myself. I was building a life, one nail, one scrubbed floorboard at a time. Then, the preliminary report from the geologists came in. Mr. Abernathy called me, his voice trembling with excitement. "Leo, you need to come into my office, now." I drove into town in the old, rusty pickup truck I'd found in the barn and managed to get running. Mr. Abernathy's office was a cozy, book-lined room that smelled of old paper and leather. He had a thick report sitting on his desk. "Their initial assessment," he said, pushing the report towards me, "is that your grandfather was underestimating the value. The deposit is larger and purer than even he suspected." "Leo," he looked me straight in the eye, "we're not talking about millions of dollars here. We're talking about hundreds of millions, potentially more." I felt the air leave my lungs. The number was so large it was meaningless. It was an abstraction, a string of zeros that had no connection to my reality of canned soup and patched roofs. "Blackwood Development has been calling my office non-stop for the past 2 days," he said. "They know. The rumors about the geologists got back to them. Their tone has changed significantly. They're no longer making threats. They're begging for a meeting." "And my cousins?" I asked. "They tried to file a lawsuit," he said with a grim smile. Challenging the will, claiming your grandfather was not of sound mind and that you exerted undue influence. He laughed. Undue influence from a state-run group home 200 miles away. The judge threw it out this morning. They have no legal standing. They are, for all intents and purposes, out of the picture. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. The fight was over. I had won. But my grandfather's final words echoed in my mind. This inheritance is not just a gift, it's a choice. The money was one thing. What I did with it was another. I don't want to sell to Blackwood, I said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even me. My grandfather spent years protecting this place from them. Selling it to them now feels like a betrayal. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, a look of profound respect on his face. I was hoping you'd say that. So what's our next move? I looked out his office window at the small, quiet town. I thought of Marge, the taxi driver, and the cashier at the grocery store, who had started to greet me by name. I thought of the clean air and the cold, clear water of the river. My grandfather said to find a way to create something that helps the community, I said, that honors the land. I want to do that. I want to start our own company, a small ethical extraction company. We'll hire locally. We'll use the profits to invest in this town. We'll set up environmental protections that go far beyond what the law requires. We won't let this place become a poisoned pit for profit. Mr. Abernathy stared at me for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled, a wide, genuine smile that transformed his weary face. Thomas would be so damn proud of you, he said. It's a monumental task, Leo. You'll be going up against giants, but I think we can do it. He stood up and extended his hand across the desk. Sterling Minerals, he said. I like the sound of that. Where do we begin? I shook his hand, my grip firm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a ward of the state, a case file, a forgotten nephew. I was Leo Sterling, and I was home. The months that followed were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. Building a company from the ground up was a steep learning curve. There were permits to file, equipment to lease, experts to hire. Mr. Abernathy was my guide through the labyrinth of legal and financial worlds, his steady, experienced hand on the tiller. I, in turn, was the keeper of the vision. Every decision we made, I measured against my grandfather's final letter. Would this honor the land? Would this benefit the community? Would this be something he would be proud of? We hired a young, brilliant environmental engineer to design an extraction process that was as low impact as possible. We held town hall meetings, presenting our plans to the people of Alcea, promising transparency and local hiring. There was skepticism at first. They were used to outside companies coming in, making big promises, and leaving a mess behind. But we were different. I was one of them now. I lived in the old farmhouse. I shopped at the local grocery store. I put in the work. I spent my days not in a boardroom, but on the land, learning every contour, every creek, every stand of old-growth trees that we would need to protect. I learned about soil reclamation and water table monitoring. I absorbed the language of the land, just as my grandfather had. The news of our venture, Alcea Sustainable Silica, as we decided to call it, sent ripples through the industry. Blackwood Development, furious at being shut out, launched a campaign to discredit us. They called us amateurs, naive idealists who didn't know what we were doing. They tried to lobby the state to revoke our permits. But we had the community on our side. Marge, the taxi driver, became one of our most vocal supporters. Local loggers and tradesmen, eager for steady work, defended us at county meetings. We were no longer just a company, we were a cause. My cousins made one last desperate attempt to get a piece of the pie. Sarah showed up at the ranch one evening, unannounced. She looked tired and bitter. The easy confidence she once had was gone, replaced by a raw, hungry desperation. "This isn't fair, Leo," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "Granddad loved us too. We deserve a share." "He gave you a choice," I said, my voice even. "He asked for your help, and you sided with the people who were trying to cheat him. You saw a rundown ranch and a dementia-addled old man. You didn't see him. You didn't see the land. You just saw money." "We need that money," she cried, her composure finally breaking. "Mark made some bad investments. We're in trouble." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. But it wasn't my problem to solve. "But this legacy, the one he left me, isn't just about money. It's about responsibility. You weren't interested in the responsibility. You just wanted the reward." She left without another word. I never heard from them again. A year after that first day on the curb, I stood on the newly repaired porch of my grandfather's house, looking out at a very different scene. The house was freshly painted, the windows clean, the roof solid. The pasture was still wild in the places we had designated as nature preserves, but on the far side of the property, a small, clean, and quiet operation was underway. Our operation. The first trucks, loaded with the precious sand that would power the next generation of technology, were rolling out, driven by men and women from the local community. We had established a community trust, seeding it with a percentage of our profits to fund scholarships, improve the local school, and support small businesses in Alcia. The town was coming back to life. I had found more than just a home and a fortune. I had found a purpose. I had reconnected with a family I thought I'd lost, not through blood, but through a shared legacy of love for a piece of land. My grandfather's presence was everywhere, in the solid feel of the porch railing under my hand, in the smell of the pines after a rain, in the quiet determination of the people now working for the company we built. His letter was framed and hung in my office, a constant reminder of the choice he had given me. It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, the same way it had in the group home. But here, it didn't feel like a sign of decay or confinement. It felt like magic. It felt like peace. Home, I had learned, isn't just a place you are given. Sometimes it's a place you have to rebuild. Sometimes you have to dig through layers of neglect and misunderstanding to find the bedrock of truth underneath. My inheritance wasn't the silica in the ground or the money in the bank. It was the lesson my grandfather had so carefully, so patiently left for me to find. That the true worth of a thing or a person is rarely visible on the surface. You have to be willing to look deeper. You have to be willing to believe that something beautiful can be hidden inside something broken. Looking back, the journey from that curb outside the group home to this porch feels both impossibly long and surprisingly short. It's a story about inheritance, but not the kind you see in movies. There was no dramatic reading of a will in a stuffy office. My inheritance came in the form of a riddle, a test, and a choice. It was delivered in a dusty box, written in a shaky hand, and hidden beneath a veneer of failure. My grandfather didn't just leave me a fortune. He left me a roadmap to becoming the man he hoped I would be. He taught me that wealth isn't a destination, it's a tool. It can be used to build or to destroy, to hoard, or to share. The choice is the only thing that matters. And every day, I wake up in this house, in this valley, and I make that choice again. I choose to build. I choose to share. I choose to honor the stubborn old geologist who saw the future sleeping under a field of weeds. This place is no longer a ruin. It's a sanctuary. And I am no longer an orphan of the state. I am a steward of this land, a guardian of a legacy. Sometimes people who have been through the system, people like me, are told that our past is a handicap. We're taught to expect less, to aim lower, to be grateful for whatever scraps we're given. But maybe our past isn't a weakness. Maybe it's a lens. Maybe it gives us the ability to see the value in things that other people have thrown away. To see the potential in a broken-down house, in an overgrown field, in ourselves. We know what it's like to have nothing, so we understand the true value of having something to protect. We know what it's like to be powerless, so we understand the responsibility that comes with having power. My story isn't about getting rich. It's about becoming worthy. Worthy of the trust my grandfather placed in me. Worthy of the second chance I was given. And that's a process that never ends. It's the quiet work I do every single day. So if you're out there and you feel like you've been discarded, like your story doesn't matter, I want you to know that it does. The things that have broken you can also be the things that make you strong. The foundations of your future are often hidden in the ruins of your past. You just have to be brave enough to start digging. This community we're building here is for people who understand that. It's for the diggers, the builders, the protectors. If my story resonated with you, if it taught you anything about home or family or the real meaning of wealth, let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your stories. What's the most valuable inheritance you've ever received? It doesn't have to be money. Maybe it was a piece of advice, a lesson, a stubborn streak of hope. I read every single comment, and I learn from them all. And if you want to be part of this journey, to hear more stories about second chances and hidden truths, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because my story isn't over. This is just the beginning.